of things that are doing young people in. So I get on a lot of shows, and sometimes they try to, like, say, Bruce, aren't you upset about the fact that there's so few young people out there, you know, resisting and rebelling and trying to kind of polarize us generationally? And my response is always, I'm stunned and impressed by any young person who's doing anything, given what's going on for them compared to what was going on for me. Just one issue alone, student loan debt. One issue alone, debt kills, you know, creates fear, kills resistance. We didn't have to deal with this. I was, you know, if you were rich when, you know, in my day, when I went to undergraduate in the 70s or 80s, mom and dad paid for all. If you were working class like myself, you know, I can try to figure out this accent. I'm from Queens, New York, and I spent the last 30 years in Cincinnati, so that's why it's a little strange accent. But back then, you go to City University of New York, and I went to Queens College for free. Absolutely free. That's why, and all over America, working class people would go and they'd have no debt. I know nobody would be talking about this. You could all get all master's degrees, PhDs without debt. And that's still the way it is in a lot of the rest of the world. And with all the internet, a lot of Americans, even a lot of American young people don't know that. There might have been 25% unemployment in Egypt, but they didn't have student debt. They weren't walking around with that. Or whatever, maybe unemployment higher, I'm not sure. But a lot of the rest of the world is not carrying it. So that becomes a big issue. And so I spend a lot of time talking about it on a political level, but also on a personal, family level. How do we get rid of that? How do we reduce that? And I think there's a lot of other issues if we want to care about energizing, building base with young people, to care about, to give them something to take away some of their pain so it makes it more likely that they'll be involved in movements. And so there's a lot of different areas. What's happened to their schooling has become even more authoritarian than it was. I mean, the history of schooling in America, I mean, despite the fact that there's lots of well-meaning teachers who really care about education, a lot of those well-meaning teachers would be the first to tell you that sometimes the demands of the institution overwhelm that, and basically they're teaching about obedience more than anything else. But this kind of thing has gotten worse with, again, another Republican Democratic bipartisanship called No Child Left Behind. Watch out when these guys have bipartisanships, okay? So what happens there? I mean, what happens there? Just very simply, you have more and more a fear-based classroom. Teachers, parents, everybody's afraid their school's going to close down if they don't have these high test scores. So, but you can't have education for democracy in a fear-based classroom, because fear kills curiosity, it kills independent learning, fear kills critical thinking, challenging authority, all of those different things you need for democracy, for an education for democracy. But, okay, the good news in all this stuff, and I switch to the good news, is it's not just me, okay, that once things get bad, I don't consider myself a natural activist. I mean, a lot of people in this room might have felt like they were born to be activists, but a lot of people were probably like me too, that they just, something happened that pissed them off enough or embarrassed them enough or whatever, that they moved into it. And that's me, okay? And so, I think a lot of teachers, I don't want to equate it to the Fugitive Slave Act, because that's hyperbole, but in the sense that when things get too authoritarian, too crazy, a lot of regular people start to kind of get politicized and radicalized. And so you see, the good news is I talk to teachers all the time who are just going up. They hate going to work. It is completely unfun. And so it's like, I'm going to start to talk. I'm going to take the chance of speaking out publicly about what we're doing to our young people. I'm going to take the chance, even in my classroom, of telling my young people that, this is not a real education they're getting here, okay? This is, making a lot of test companies out there rich. It's a whole other kind of industrial complex. In my own profession, what I talk a lot about to colleagues and where I can to the general public is something called about liberation psychology. Now, what happens, and Eric Fromm, who is a democratic socialist psychoanalyst in the 1950s, he predicted, he saw this coming, that the mental health profession was going to become increasingly used to help people to adapt and adjust to society, regardless of how undemocratic and authoritarian and dehumanizing that society was. He saw it, and he saw, like what I see, is that unfortunately a lot of those folks are not politicized enough to know what the heck is going on, and they're thinking that they're just doing their job, helping people adapt and adjust. But other folks and around the rest of the world are ahead of us in this, like they are in a lot of other things. In South America, Central America, Africa, social scientists are much more hip to this idea of liberation psychology than any, it sounds new from American psychologists, but it wouldn't be if we were in Central America, South America, or Africa. And actually, this term, liberation psychology, I'm so proud of myself, I thought I invented it. But when I started, reading, when I thought about this many years ago, 15 years ago, it turned out, oh yeah, this guy, Ignacio Martin Barrow, I think he deserves the credit for it, because, I mean, the guy died for it. And literally what happened to, and he's an El Salvadorian social psychologist and priest, Jesuit priest, who was also a liberation theologian, who ended up, in 1989, for his work, was assassinated by U.S. trained El Salvadoran death squad. And that's Ignacio Martin Barrow, is his name. And Martin Barrow got a lot of his work from, like I said, a lot of these other South American, Central American, other folks in Africa, their understanding of what happens to oppressed people. And this is tough for Americans because we don't have a Pinochet or a Mubarak or one of these kind of characters. We have something called like the corporate state or the corporatocracy, or as George Carlin called them, the owners of this country, whatever you want to call them. And it's much more, it's not as personal, but the reality is we have moved into also this kind of subjugated psychology. And what happens is when you've been oppressed for too long, this is just common sense, that you move into a kind of internal oppression. You move into a kind of a fatalism. You move into a defeatism, a hopelessness, a helplessness. Or you move into what Bob Marley, who's sort of the patron saint of oppressed people around the world, what he called mental slavery. Right? And so he sang about emancipating yourself from mental slavery. And so that's what I think about a lot. How do we free people up from, I think these are my terms, maybe somebody else has come up with these before me too, but corporatocracy, abuse, battered people syndrome. How do we liberate ourselves from that? And a lot of it is they are parallels to how you help people get out of abuse, like spousal abuse syndrome. And it's about how do you get people get their strength back? How do you get them to let go of their fear? And a lot of that is about letting go of their shame. Okay? So a lot of people, an important part, it's not the only aspect of it, but one part of it is, if you want to get back your strength, you got to let go of shame, you got to let go of fear, and a part of that is forgiving yourself, and actually forgiving other people too, okay, for still buying into crap. Right? Because the reality is, all abusers, whether they're some spouse beater, or they're Dick Cheney. You don't have to be that bright. If you practice all day long being a liar, you're going to be pretty good at it. Right. And there's no shame to have bought into some lies. And that's important, to sort of forgive other people who are still buying in, and to be able to forgive yourself. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. The last thing that I want to kind of go through is another aspect of what I think is important to kind of liberation psychology in terms of, again, going back to what Jonathan was talking about and others have too, is building a base, okay? And how do we get a larger base? How do we create greater solidarity? And, the first thing that I want to say about that is this, time-tested tactic for the elite, okay? Since they're large in cash and few in numbers, what would you do? Divide and conquer, right? It's always been used. They will always do it. That's their major strategy. So, in American history, they always tried to divide us racially, right? They divide us ethnically, religious way. Lately, their latest sort of wrinkle, their latest is to divide union workers from non-union workers, right? They're trying to do that, all over. So they're always going to do that. And so one thing is obvious, is to recognize that and to call it out and identify that as much as possible. But more empowering for me, and this is what I want to kind of finish up on, are those areas that we divide ourselves on. And when you see these, we can do something about them every day. And so, again, a major point of what I'm trying to talk about here is folks are getting ready to leave and go back to their communities. What the heck can we do when we go back, to build a greater base, okay? And so, like I said, there's a lot of things that we do that we get divided on, a lot of things that we do that we divide ourselves, but I just want to talk about two that I think are pretty important. One is this divide that I call the divide between comfortable anti-authoritarians and afflicted anti-authoritarians. And I don't use this term comfortable anti-authoritarian pejoratively, negatively. Okay, it's not like I'm, the idle rich or limousine liberals. I'm not saying it negatively. The reality is, though, that there are some of us who are, more comfortable than others. Okay, it may be through luck that we happen to be one of those anti-authoritarians who have some money in the bank, or we have a job. Maybe we've got a prof job, or maybe we've got a pension, or something like that. Or, we've got something, there's other ways that you become more comfortable too, that maybe you're not even wealthy, maybe you don't have that much money. But another great pain reduction is that you're one of those Americans who actually feel like you're doing something meaningful. Which, if you take a look at Department of Labor statistics, you realize that most of the jobs, people don't feel like they're doing something meaningful out there. So that's a pain reduction. Another great pain, another pain reduction is that you're not one of those Americans out there who are completely socially isolated. Okay, so maybe you don't have that much money, but you're not. You've got some people, some support. Or another great pain reduction is that maybe you're not even making a lot of money writing, but you've got, or speaking, but you've got a platform. People hear what you have to say. That's a great pain reduction. As opposed to this sort of afflicted anti-authoritarian group out there, which is the vast majority of Americans, from my experience. And over, we have to have confidence that the vast majority of Americans, you look at the polls, they oppose these senseless wars. They oppose these corporate welfare. They're on our side, the majority of Americans, on these things. And so, but the vast majority of them are also in this afflicted zone where they're overwhelmed by the pain of their life. The pain of student loan debt with a crappy job. The pain of foreclosures, bankruptcy closing in on them. The pain of being completely alienated from their surroundings, being socially isolated. The pain of nobody giving a damn about what they have to say. Okay, if you've ever done call radio, if you've ever done sport radio, you hear lots of these folks, that's their only place. And you can hear their desperation. And so, I think one of the things that we all have to keep in mind, and I'm sure some of you, I have traveled along this continuum in my life. I can't say I have been completely afflicted or completely comfortable, but I've traveled some along that continuum, and I know a lot of other folks here have too. And one of the things to keep in mind is that you're in a very different psychology when you're in more of that afflicted anti-authoritarian zone. When you're in that zone and people come at you with truths about how screwed up it is and what we should be doing, and lectures, it feels like scolding, okay, and it can even be shaming. It can feel like more pain. So what do you do with more pain when you're overwhelmed by pain? What do you do? Exactly. You turn off. You walk away. It's like, I don't need that. All right? So one of the things that people need to kind of keep in mind is when you're dealing with folks, have confidence that they're on your side, but also recognize if you haven't been there yourself and you can't remember what it's like to get through the day. The only way to keep from going crazy and feeling psychotic or suicidal is to watch a little bit too much stupid TV or drink too many beers. It's possible for all of us. Certainly I've been there. Just to kind of get through the day, to take the edge off. And when you're in that zone, what you're looking for is somebody to reduce your pain some. Now, if we don't do it, demagogues will. And they'll do it in a way that's going to create opportunities for them. So you could ignore it, and that's what will happen, or you can take it seriously and not exploit it. Do something, that will build a movement. And that's been done throughout history. I talked about the populist movement. That's what they did. I mean, they figured out ways to create the largest working people's co-op in history. It was incredibly successful, and it was one of the greatest recruiting tools in American history for a democratic movement. Others, what Jonathan was talking about here earlier, just reducing people's pain by having, you come to a coffee house, get some free coffee. But at the very least, a pain reduction is respect and empathy for somebody's position. And that's very important in building some solidarity with that huge group that we want to have if we're going to have, a significant force. Last group, that last divide, I want to finish up on this. There's another one that's sort of close to my heart, is a divide among us, and even a divide among some of us internally, is a divide around hope. Okay? And, you know, from my experience, there are no Pollyannish, critically thinking anti-authoritarians. I just never met any. Maybe there are, but I haven't met any. The divide is really one among people who feel like, Bruce, there's no chance in hell. Come on. You know, these guys are just too big, they're just too powerful, it's a waste. Versus a group of folks who feel like, you know, I think maybe there's one chance in hell. You know? And that's kind of the divide I see a lot. And that's certainly the divide in me. You know? That's my divide. And so one of the advantages that I have from working with, you know, clinically with people for 25 years, working with depressed people, and not drugging the crap out of everybody, you know, and just actually talking to them, you know, that kind of thing, is that you understand that one of the things that depressed people are actually more critically thinking. And actually studies show this. If you go and, this is old-time psychology says a lot of these things were done in the late 70s, early 80s. What they did was they gave people games where they literally had no control, no power over winning. Okay? And the people who were better able at predicting how powerless they were in the game, okay, so more critical thinking, they were more likely to be depressives. All right? And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. And what happens when you are critical thinking, you know, just like every human trait, it's double-edged, okay? There's neat things about it, and there's things that could cause you to move into defeatism, move into fatalism, move into kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. So one of the things that I think is important, I have this conversation with myself, I have conversation all the time with critically thinking, anti-authoritarian, hopeless people out there, is that it's important to know that as critically thinking as you are, and it's true, you're seeing more of the crap of the world, more of these pharmaceutical industrial complex, the energy industrial complex, the military industrial, on, you're seeing it. But the truth of it is if you're human, you don't see everything. Okay? So it's important, I guess what we're talking about here is humility, is you don't see everything. And one great example for me personally is Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln's an interesting guy for me because most Americans know that he was one of our more critically thinking presidents. He's certainly one of our best writers as a president. But they're not exposed to the idea that he was also a major depressive. When he was young, he got depressed twice, so badly, friends formed suicide watches on Lincoln. So that's just an aside. A guy like him could not get elected president today, right? No way. So, anyways, the interesting thing for me is that in the 1850s, when the big battle in America was not really over abolishing slavery, the big battle was stopping the spread of slavery. Those who wanted it to spread versus stopping the spread. This was the major battle. And Lincoln was opposed to stopping, he was opposed to the spread of slavery. Clearly opposed to it. And, what happens is in 1856, he writes this extensive, analysis of economically why the South has so much more to lose by stopping the spread of slavery than the North has to gain by stopping this. It's clearly in the South. There's too much going on economically to the South. And he gets pessimistic about his cause. All right. And the interesting thing is, as sort of critically thinking as he was, there was no way in a million years he could have predicted 4 years later that he would get the nomination. His political career was pretty checkered. He lost a lot more than he won. And he could never guess that he would become nominated president of the United States, and that he would win in this upstart party called the Republican Party, that would win with not the majority of votes. It was a three-way race. And that even though Lincoln was not running on abolishing slavery, just stopping the spread of it, that would be enough to piss off the South, or most of the southern states, including the one we're in here right now, to secede. And that would drive some boys in South Carolina so crazy that they would fire on a federal fort called Fort Sumter. And that one event would follow after another, and that in less than a decade after Lincoln's pessimistic analysis about just stopping the spread of slavery, slavery would be abolished. It would just be unfathomable to see that in 1856. And in my lifetime, there's lots of examples of this kind of thing too. Even before, the latest one, obviously the Arab Spring and what's going on there, that folks I talk to who are from that part of the world, they're amazed. They're stunned, a lot of these folks that I talk to. But in my lifetime, even before that, when I was a kid growing up, 70s, 80s, the idea of the Soviet Union just disappearing, I mean, as an institution. I mean, if you would have said that, you know, in 1970s, early 1980s even, you know, when Reagan's elected there, if you would have said that, people said, what kind of drugs are you on? That's just like, that's not going to happen. But here's the thing, these guys in Poland, closer to the situation, in Gdansk, shipyard builders, Solidarity, right? They formed it, and really a lot of what they were trying to do is just hang in there. You know, create morale for all of Eastern Europe. Be a thorn in the side of the Soviet Union. And what happens? Lots of other events happen that weaken the Soviet Union, including their own stupid Afghanistan war, right? And then before you know it, poof, there's like no Soviet Union. This is sort of shocking. So there's like lots of events that challenge anybody, any critically thinking anti-authoritarian, to just assume, just because of what the reality of how bleak that they're seeing all the possible events. Which means that things are possible. And here's the thing, and even more sticking with talking to these critically thinking, pessimistic folks that we all deal with, maybe like I said, even internally, is that whether or not, you know, if history tells us that these empires are a lot more fragile than they look at any given time. So whether we push it over, it's going to fall over, okay? One way or the other, it's going to go, okay? And that, so either way, either in the attempt to help push over this military-industrial complex and all these other, I should say, undemocratic industrial complexes that rule us, or maybe more importantly, what is necessary for a society after those things are gone, are all of those things, all of those democracy battlefields, and that's why each day in every way, that's why it still makes sense to fight for, fight those battles to maintain and create individual self-respect and collective self-confidence and determination and courage and solidarity. Thank you.